All right, and that wraps up the 11th Binational Commission, South Africa and Nigeria, its respective presidents, Cyril Ramaphosa and Bola Tinubu, providing their closing remarks there. Let's bring in Dr. Oscar van Heerden. He's a research associate at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership, and that's at the University of Johannesburg. He joins us this afternoon. Doc, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. What a charm offensive by the president, in fine form there, wishing the media well at the end of that engagement. But this was a masterclass in diplomatic speak, wasn't it? Strong bonds of friendship, solidarity, partners, allies. What stood out for you?
No, I think what stood out for me is the fact that for the first time in a long time, we've seen the two presidents from really the two regional hegemons on the continent, with the exclusion of Egypt, of course, coming together and expressing goodwill and saying that they want to work together. And I think this is really good. There is some tension that I pick up, particularly with the requests from Nigeria for its inclusion in the G20, as well as the emphasis on the reform in the UN Security Council. I'm sure you would know these would be contentious issues, but very maturely dealt with by both presidents, and President Ramaphosa indicating that indeed he will apply his mind and will support the call for Nigeria to be included in the G20 grouping.
Yeah, and I'm sure that those conversations are taking place in the background, right? Perhaps we don't see the full extent of just how they go. But how do you reckon the inclusion in BRICS, how do you reckon that conversation would have gone?
Well, the truth is that, as you are rightfully pointing out, happen at Syria level, diplomatic, of course, and the presidents are just sort of agreeing to read out the communique and find common ground. But yes, I mean, I think that, just like all other countries that have joined in terms of BRICS Plus, I think there is an argument to be made that an additional country from Africa, particularly Nigeria, should also be included within the grouping. But it does mean, even though people are arguing that it seems any country can join BRICS, there is a few fundamental lines that is present, and I think Nigeria needs to correct some of those in order to actually form part of the BRICS countries.
And what would those be?
Well, it's a very large country. There's still some division between North and South in the country, tensions that are there between the Muslims and the Christians. These are not necessarily issues that would spill over into BRICS, but it's domestic issues that the president would have to address, would have to look at. And of course, also talking about just its influence in the broader region of West Africa and what's happening there. That's also why the two presidents were talking about the fact that there's a need for peace and security on the continent and so forth. So I think those are elements that BRICS countries probably would want to see Nigeria play a much bigger role in order to also ascend to membership.
Would that not be a case of BRICS countries, the pot calling the kettle black?
No, not necessarily, because if you look at a number of the countries that have joined, for example, Egypt has made the membership that they wanted membership in BRICS. South Africa, obviously. Ethiopia also indicated. I don't think that those are countries where there's those kinds of dynamics that is existing in one of the largest populous country in Africa.
So let's talk more about the G20. The president's had an incredibly busy diary this Tuesday. Just this morning, he was launching South Africa's presidency of the G20. And a lot of talk of reform and the kinds of things the president wants to use the G20 presidency to do. He has quite a long list. What do you make of some of the things that he's saying he's pushing for?
Well, a number of the issues that was dealt with under the chairpersonship of President Lula in Brazil, issues of the commitment to end poverty and hunger. You see the two presidents today talking about food security, addressing poverty. So there's an extension of that, but also the transformation of multilateral institutions. I think this is becoming a theme. President Lula in Brazil was talking more on the financial institutions. I think that President Ramaphosa is going to talk more about actual UN reform in terms of the Security Council and so on. So there's going to be an extension first and foremost. But I think where there's going to be a marked difference is that South Africa's chairpersonship is obviously going to want to put Africa's agenda first, front and center. It's going to talk of Agenda 2063, and it's going to talk about, how do we begin a process where it's not just about providing resources and extraction, but also beneficiation and manufacturing, and becoming really participants in the global economy and not just, extractive economics.
Dr. van Heerden, I wonder what, someone who might be watching, looking at all the pomp and ceremony around South Africa being the first African nation to take on the presidency of the G20, what we're thinking here at home with our own set of challenges when the president talks about things like pushing for global equality in a context where we live in a country that is among the most unequal in the world. He wants to push for poorer nations. He wants to push for the brunt of decisions to be that are made by bigger economies to be shared more broadly in terms of geopolitics. To an ordinary person, do they understand the pomp and ceremony of the G20 presidency? Do we get a sense of how this impacts me at home?
Well, I think that's the task of, indeed, Derko, over the next few months, is to actually make people of South Africa understand, firstly, why this particular gathering is happening here, what is preceding the actual gathering, which is the various ministerial commissions and meetings and so forth. And we need to locate the triple challenges of South Africa, poverty, inequality, and unemployment, within the broader context of the theme that South Africa have agreed upon for the G20 next year, which is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And I think what the president is going to do, and the team, South Africa team, is going to locate those three triple challenges within the broader context of calling for more equity, more sustainability in the world. Because ultimately, if you are the chairperson of the G20, it is understandable that the citizens of South Africa would want to understand what precisely is the direct benefit for them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a one-year position, a one-year rotational term of president of the G20. How much can we achieve in those 12 months?
Well, this is why, there's an official launch. As you've indicated, it happened already. The president has made the agenda quite clear. What happens now is a host of interactions and meetings from the various countries, not only the G20. Remember, there's also a parallel civil society process that's going to take place in South Africa, where civil society themselves also want to have a say, and we need to find a mechanism of how that's going to gel with the formal processes. But also I'm made to understand that South Africa is not only going to put Africa first and front and center, but they are also going to invite all heads of states from the continent to come and participate and be part of the G20. So it's going to be a humongous event, probably one of the largest ever. And I do hope that there is some sincerity in making sure that the Africa agenda is actually going to play out within the G20.
I don't want to jump back and forth, but I want to just close off our conversation with a question around the binational commission between South Africa and Nigeria. It's the 11th binational commission. Would you say that there's been the kind of progress? We've had 40-odd agreements that have been signed over the period since 1994. Have we seen the kind of progress that perhaps both countries would have hoped for in 2024?
I do think so. I mean, if you just look at, for example, certain sectors, I think that the retail sector has benefited from this binational commission. We see more and more South African companies in Nigeria, Fisherways, Debonair's, we see Nando's, we see ShopRite that is also MTN, and many others in the financial services sector and so forth. And of course, agriculture has also benefited enormously, providing goods and services, fruits and vegetables, wine, etc., to the Nigerian market, which is a huge market, and vice versa. We know of a number of Nigerian companies. There can and there is room for more, of course, and this is what the two presidents have indicated. But I think that there has been serious benefit economically, financially, and in terms of employment, not only in Nigeria, but also for South Africans that is producing these goods. So all in all, I think that the Commission has been quite a good one.
Dr. Oscar van Heerden, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Research Associate at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg.